Alright, this unit's topic is immortality and whether or not it would actually be a good thing, whether or not we should want immortality. As Belshaw says in the chapter that you read for this unit, should you take the elixir of life, if you're offered a magic potion that would grant you immortality, should you drink it? I mean, it seems like you would say yes, obviously, but there are actually a number of discussions in literature which suggest that maybe this wouldn't be a good thing. There's a famous children's book that was made into a movie called Tuck Everlasting, which is sort of about the downsides to an immortal life. I think I can't remember, I read it a while ago, but the idea is that a family drinks from the fountain of youth and then doesn't age, and this girl encounters the family and falls in love with the boy in the family, and it's the idea is that immortality is a mixed blessing. There's another story that I was just thinking about. Oh yeah, of course, Harry Potter, and the first of the Harry Potter books, which in England is called the Philosopher's Stone, but apparently philosophy has a bad name in the States, so they changed it to the Sorcerer's Stone. That stone grants eternal youth, and the owner of the stone destroys it at the end, I think. Oh, spoiler alert if you haven't read it. And consigns himself to a mortal life, and it's, you know, presented as not such a bad thing. So why might we argue that immortality isn't just awesome, particularly as it seems like that's what religion, or certainly contemporary Christianity and Islam and most forms of Judaism seem to be offering that. That is in the form of what is sometimes called an afterlife, but it isn't really an afterlife. It's after the life of your body, maybe, but your life is not really supposed to end. You're supposed to stay alive forever, which is what immortality is. If that's supposed to be one of the big appeals of religion, of these religions, that they grant you immortality. And as we'll see in a reading for next unit by a contemporary Christian philosopher, William Lane Craig, he argues that you've got to have immortality to give life meaning. Well, some of the arguments that you read this week argue just the opposite, that immortality takes away from a meaningful life, or certainly a human life, a life that we can see as human. Okay, so a lot of the discussion, both in the Belshaw and the Fisher readings, is based on a well-known paper by a well-known in philosophy circles philosopher, Bernard Williams. I say Bernard and not Bernard because that's how English people say it, and he's English, or was English, unless of course he is immortal, which would be a downside for him. But anyway, Bernard Williams discusses another case from literature, in this case from a play and an opera, a character called Alina Necropolis, who, as you'll know if you've done the reading, takes her father creates this elixir of life and tests it on her. He's working for the king or emperor or something, and who demands that the elixir be tested on someone, so he tests it on his own daughter, and it makes her sick for a while, so the emperor doesn't take it, but it turns out that that was just temporary and it worked. But you have to keep taking it every 330 something odd years, otherwise you start aging again. And she takes it and lives for 332, I think, years, and then decides, I've had enough of this, and she doesn't take it again. So she obviously declines immortality when there was the chance at it, and supposedly for good reason. Alright, so what are the challenges to the appeal of immortality? In Bernard Williams' original talk and article, he presents it as there are two requirements for immortality and to be worthwhile. And these are the identity requirement and the attractiveness requirement. Now, both of the readings, Fisher and Belshaw, expand the requirements into three, arguing that, I guess, it's sort of implicit in Williams's original article that there's really three. But the two main ones, certainly, that Williams talks about are identity and attractiveness. And he says that you've got to have both for a worthwhile immortal life, and you can't have both because they clash. If you've got one, that automatically rules out the other. They're in conflict. Alright, so well, before we get to that, there's a quite interesting discussion in Fisher about the various possible kinds of immortality. And I think that's covered a little bit by the discussion of personal identity that was the topic of the previous unit. But let's look at the terminology that Fisher uses. First of all, he says there's a distinction between, assuming, of course, that the immortality is within our own bodies, which would be Bernard Williams' assumption, because you might remember the name Bernard Williams. He was a critic of the memory theory of personal identity, and argued that the body theory was the best theory, that the only sense in which I am the same person now as I was 10 years ago is that I've got the same body. Memories are not enough. Okay, so he wouldn't accept any other kind of immortality. Immortality without your body would not really be you. So, and we saw that there are various issues with the idea that you're of a soul, an immortal soul, and so on. So the kind of immortality that is sort of assumed in the discussions is that you essentially go on as you are. This is certainly to be preferred to the kind of immortality memorably described in Gulliver's Travels. I don't know how many people are familiar with Gulliver's Travels. I think most of you have heard of it, and there was that god-awful Jack Black movie that nobody went to see a few years ago, version of it. But it's the most famous of Gulliver's Travels is to Lilliput, where he's a giant and they're tiny, and you know, he wakes up, his ship is wrecked and he wakes up on the beach and he's tied down because he's a giant and these are all tiny people and they want to trap him so he doesn't run amok like King Kong or something. But that's just the first of his voyages, and he undergoes several. The second one is to Brobdingnag, where the tables are turned and now he's tiny and they're giant. And then it becomes steadily stranger. I can't remember if it's the third one, where he encounters the Struldbrugs. And the Struldbrugs are people who, just by a quirk of fate, will never die. But this is definitely not seen as a good thing, because although they will never die, they age. So they just get older and older and older and older and older and more decrepit, and their teeth fall out and they can't remember the end of a sentence. They can't remember the beginning of a sentence when they reach the end, and they just it's like they become little mummies that walk around, but death never comes to so, you know, when people get really old and their bodies are broken down and their memories are gone, we usually say death is a sort of a relief. But this for the Struldbrugs, this relief never comes. and that's seen as a curse, and I think most people would view it as such. So that would be a bad form of immortality, an immortality that I don't think anyone would want. So the immortality that, at least on the face of it, appears appealing is where you don't age. Now, he also talks about, so he makes a distinction between contingent and necessary. What does that mean? Well, contingent immortality means you never die, but not because of some essential feature of you. You could die. At any moment it's possible for you to die, you just don't. Well, what would be the alternative? That would be, the alternative is necessary immortality, where because of your nature it is impossible that you cease to exist. And for example, God is supposed to have necessary immortality, that God would not be God if God could die. He has necessary immortality, whereas contingent immortality might be, you know, I don't know if anybody remembers, there was a really cheesy movie, a series of movies, and actually a TV show called Highlander back in the 80s, I think, where there were certain people who lived throughout history, and they were called the Immortals, and they could be killed, but only if you cut their head off or something. I didn't really follow it. But in theory, so they would be contingently immortal, because they are immortal, but they could be killed if you chop their head off in the right way. Okay, robust immortality is where it's necessary immortality, and it adds to that you know that you have a necessary immortality. So there's sort of 4 possible immortalities you could have in the first 2 distinctions. Contingent immortality, where you know it's contingent, or contingent where you don't know the nature of your immortality. Maybe you don't even know you're immortal. You just surprise yourself by not dying. And then necessary immortality, where you don't know, and necessary immortality when you do, and that last one is robust immortality, which presumably God would have. Now, the other kind, some other sort of distinctions to do with immortality is, you can imagine a form of immortality where you sort of merge with other beings. So when you leave your body, say, your soul goes into one giant soul pool and you become like a group mind. I don't think we find that very appealing, just because we like being individual people. Although I'm sure there are certain religions which argue that is what would happen to us. There were characters in one of the Star Trek franchises, I think it was Deep Space Nine or something, who were these shape-shifting guys, and they sort of merged into one big puddle in their home planet, and presumably, you know, presumably that would be what he calls non-atomistic immortality, where you just join some giant group mind. Or the Borg was another creature from Star Trek who might have this. Whereas we certainly, I think, are more drawn to atomistic immortality, although that might be considerably more lonely. Then there's a distinction between serial and non-serial. Serial immortality, I think the discussion in the previous unit would say that's not really immortality. That's the kind of idea that we see in Buddhism and Hinduism, where you are reincarnated. But the thing is, you don't remember. So according to Buddhism, I have an infinite series of past lives, but I can't remember them. Now, of course, in Buddhism, once you become enlightened, once you achieve nirvana, one of the benefits of achieving nirvana is you instantly become aware of all your infinite past lives. And that supposedly happened to the Buddha and Shirley MacLaine, apparently. But if that didn't happen to you, as it doesn't happen to most of us, in what sense are they really your past lives? These are just lives that happened before you that you have no connection with. I mean, you might as well say that the atoms, suppose it turned out that the atoms I'm made of were all united a few hundred years ago in another individual. So I'm made of exactly the same stuff as, you know, Julius Caesar, let's say. I think I used this example before, but I can't remember, so obviously I didn't, because I would have to remember. If I'm just because I'm made of the same stuff, it doesn't make me the same person, is the usual criticism. So actually, serial lives doesn't really sound like immortality. It seems like for it really to be me continuing to live, there have to be non-serial. Maybe the Eric Morecambe case described by Christopher Belshaw would count as a bit like serial lives, although there isn't really a discrete beginning and ending in each of those cases. He's just never remembers more than 30 years back. So if you talk about what he did 35 years ago, he will have no memory of it, and he will say, okay, but I don't think that's me because I don't remember it. What we want is, we want immortality where it continues to be us. So, you know, millions of years in the future, that's still me. Assuming we do want that. But I'm just saying, trying to sketch the best possible conception of immortality before we then go on and say, even in the best possible form of immortality, would that be something we want? Alright, so that's the section on various kinds of immortality that Fisher talks about in his article. And it is interesting to sort of wonder some things about what heaven would be like if there were a heaven. For example, I always wondered, you know, what happens to babies who die? Presumably they don't stay babies, do they? Assuming they go to heaven, do they grow up in heaven, or do they arrive fully grown in heaven with sort of the middle years cut out? And what would they remember? How would they learn to talk? There was a kids show when I was a kid on British TV called Rent-A-Ghost. It was really bad in general, but there were some interesting ideas in it. And one of the ideas I remember, the basic idea is this guy can see ghosts, and he and the ghost strike a deal whereby I can't remember, I might be confusing it with the plot of a Peter Jackson movie called The Frighteners, which he made before he made Lord of the Rings. In that one, they strike a deal where they will haunt a house, and then the human will come and say, I cast thee out, and then they'll go out and they'll split the proceeds, although I don't remember how money helps ghosts. But anyway, there's this sort of deal between this human and these ghosts that he can communicate with. But there is a point, and I'm getting to it. The point is, two of the ghosts are a mother and son. And the son is an old man, because he lived to be an old man before he died, whereas the mother is a young woman, because she died young. So you have this young woman bossing around this old man who is her son. So she's much younger than her son because of the different ages they died at. Would that happen in heaven? Would that be the... in which case, you know, kill yourself in the prime of life, because if you're going to live forever with the age you died at, you know, you left this mortal coil at, well, then you want to die in the prime of life, don't you? There is actually a phenomenon in Japan of loving couples committing suicide while they're happy, you know, because the idea being that it's all downhill from here, you know, so we might as well die while we're at the top. Not something I would recommend, but there you go. Anyway, so what will happen in heaven? Will these babies grow up, or will they be fitted with false memories, or what? And if you can grow up in heaven, well, what's the point of this earth at all? Wouldn't it be better to just abort babies instantly so that they go straight to heaven and don't? Because after all, earth is a minefield of opportunities to sin and determine your fate in hell. Whereas if you prevent a baby even getting the chance to sin, presumably they go straight to heaven. It used to be in Catholic theology, they went to a place called Limbo. And I think they had to be prayed out of it. No, originally they went straight to hell, which is why you had to baptize babies. Yeah, unbaptized babies went straight to hell. But at some point they decided that was a little too harsh, so then babies started to go to limbo, which is this sort of in-between waiting area, and maybe they have to be prayed out of limbo. But just a couple of years ago, I can't remember which pope it was, I think it might have been Pope John Paul II, got rid of limbo, and dead babies go straight to heaven now, which is good news for dead babies. Anyway, those kind of issues aside, let's focus on the idea. Pick your ideal form of immortality. Prime of life, you stay just the way you are, maybe with a few improvements. You know, you can't be injured, or if you get injured you just heal automatically. Maybe if you've got bad eyesight that gets fixed. Maybe, you know, you get an automatic nose job and your skin clears up. I don't know. Your ideal. What's wrong with that? That sounds perfect. There's a famous Woody Allen joke where he says a lot of people say it's possible to achieve immortality through your work. You know, like your books and your films, or in his case. He says, I prefer to achieve immortality through not dying. And that's certainly, you know, what we tend to think of as the ideal form of immortality. Just, you know, life without the nasty death part at the end. Alright, so what does Williams have to say about this? Well, remember, there are two conditions, the identity condition and the attractiveness condition. Now, let's, again, I used to live in Arkansas, and they had a lot of religious channels on the TV in Arkansas. Basic cable consisted of a lot of those. And I remember watching one of these idly one day, and there was this woman with this amazing giant pink wig who seemed to spend a lot of her time crying. But she said something that really stuck with me, because this is, you know, over 10 years ago, and it's still with me. And she said, if you're one of those people who likes peace and quiet, well, too bad, because heaven is going to be 10,000 people shouting hallelujah at the top of their lungs for every minute of every day. And my immediate thought was, well, there goes my last incentive to be good, because that sure sounds like hell to me. But imagine that when I get to heaven, I become the kind of person who wants nothing more than that. You know, right now I like to, you know, read in peace and quiet, watch a movie, you know, go for a walk, that kind of thing. But imagine if I get to heaven and suddenly all I want to do is shout hallelujah at the top of my lungs every second of every day for all eternity. That just gives me the biggest kick. I mean, it's like crack cocaine for me, shouting hallelujah. I can't get enough of that. I don't have to sleep. I can just do it forever. I never get a sore throat. It's just like, you know, cats with catnip. Would that be, and imagine I'm told, this is your afterlife, this is your immortality. What would I say about that? I would say, that's not me. I haven't survived. You have created a zombie in my place, a hallelujah loving zombie. But the person I know, has ceased to exist. This is a travesty. This is as if you've lobotomized me or something. But I'm gone. This being, it might have my memories, but it's not me, because it's changed too radically. Because I, as I am now, would not like that kind of life for all eternity. And this is what Williams means by the identity condition. Someone who wouldn't get bored in eternity has lost the identity. They have lost what makes them distinctive in life. Because if you think about it, you would get bored. You would start begging for death, says Williams. What's the quote from at the beginning of the Belshaw chapter? Is a quote from Julian Barnes, who's well known in England. He's a well thought of novelist. And the quote is, "The people who ask for death earliest are a bit like you." This is obviously directed at a character. "People who want an eternity of sex, beer, drugs, fast cars, that sort of thing. They can't believe their good luck at first, because, you know, they don't die and they can have sex, beer, drugs, fast cars for as long as they like. They can't believe their good luck at first. And then a few hundred years later, they can't believe their bad luck." The suggestion being, even sex, beer, drugs, and fast cars get pretty damn tedious after the 5 millionth time. So here's the clash. Either you will get bored, which is what happens if you don't change. If you don't change, you will get bored. It will just be again. There's another quote, I can't remember who had it, from Thomas Jefferson. You know, "I am tired of getting up in the morning and putting my clothes on and then taking off my clothes at the end of the day. It's like, this again. Jeez, didn't we just do this?" And anything will get boring after long enough. Unless, of course, your character has changed and you become someone who says, "Oh boy, getting up in the morning again. Woohoo!" You know, like, or you say, "Oh great, shouting hallelujah at the top of my lungs again." Whew, doesn't get better than this. So if you don't find it boring, it's because you've been brainwashed, because your character has been changed totally. If you haven't been brainwashed, you will find it boring. So one way or the other, either it won't be you because the identity condition is violated, you know, that's the happy hallelujah shouter, or it will be you, in which case the attractiveness condition is violated, and you'll just regret drinking that. You'll be like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, in about the middle of the movie, where he starts trying to commit suicide in various ways and keeps finding himself waking up again. If you haven't seen Groundhog Day, boy, are you in for a treat. It's an awesome movie. But there is a scene where he takes the Punxsutawney Phil, the groundhog, and lets him drive the truck over a cliff. And it's funny because, you know, he's going to wake up again. So that's the original Williams idea. But there are other additions to this. And the other challenge, besides the identity challenge and the attractiveness challenge, is the recognizability challenge. That's what Fisher talks about. And he focuses on other writers than Williams making this criticism. So various what is meant by the recognizability challenge is, even if you weren't bored with it, it wouldn't be the kind of life that is recognizably human. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to be God? If you do, you're probably a megalomaniac. So get yourself committed. But if you did, it doesn't actually sound that great. Everything's up to you. You're perfect. You can't sin because you're perfect. And you've got to be all loving, and you've got to be all these things, and you live forever, and you never change. Doesn't actually sound that appealing. I mean, always the bad guys in science fiction movies and such are always trying to be some kind of god, And I never really saw the point myself, because once you're at the top, you know, and they're always trying to wipe out all life in the universe. Why? You'd just be lonely. That's part of what I think would be the recognizability. You know, if you were to become someone who was immortal, the life that would be presented to you would not be recognizable as a human existence. Someone might tell you, yes, but it's better, but that doesn't do it for me. It's as if, you know, somebody told me, but look, you'll be ecstatically happy when you're shouting hallelujah for every second of every day. It'll be the best experience of your life. And it's like, I don't care, you know. That's not what I want out of life. That's not what makes sense to me. I think there's a response to this, and it is, well, you don't know till you've tried it. And that's fair enough. I mean, you can always say that. It's like, why would you ever drink beer for the first time? If you give beer to kids, it's disgusting. They hate it. Or coffee. And yet, somehow or other, most of us find ourselves drinking lots of both of them at some point and loving it. So you don't really know till you've tried it. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer to Bernard Williams. Yeah, just give it a try. But let's look at what the criticisms are. First of those is borders and content. The idea being that a life, and this is sort of related to the various others, a life that is infinite is not one that makes sense to us. We can only envisage things in terms of a finite span. Now, in response to this is kind of a vague criticism, and in response to this, Fisher gives the example of an infinitely long electrocardiogram, suggesting, you know, which is one of those squiggly line things. We can imagine such a thing, because it'll just be a electrocardiogram that goes on forever in each direction. And it's not formless, it's still got a shape, it just is extended in one dimension. So, and that's something like his response to the narrative criticism. The criticism that human lives, as we understand them, are narratives, and narratives have to come to an end. And I think Fisher is right to say, no, they don't. Well, maybe parts of narratives have to come to an end, but, you know, as he quite rightly talks about soap operas. There are soap operas that have been going on for 60 years. I don't know, there's a radio show in England called The Archers that's been going on for years and years and years and years. And, you know, the original people have died off and they brought new ones in, and it's going strong. Now, of course, what you could say in response is, yes, the original people have died off. But you could imagine... you know, you could still say, well, just take the deaths out, and just have, you know, this time so and so goes to, let's, you know, the entire cast goes on vacation to Bermuda or something, and this time they go stay the night in a haunted house, you know, and it's a new story, and you can keep it going. Or you know, comic books do this. They just keep the story. They've got the same character, and they just, you know, the story never ends. I mean, Spider-Man basically hasn't aged since being a teenager in 1962. So let's see, he was probably born in about 1948. No, 1946. So he would be, what, coming on for 70 now. But doesn't look bad on it, does he? You know, and the stories, they just keep repeating, or no, I don't want to say that, they don't keep repeating the stories, but the stories can continue with no end in sight. It's not as if you can't you say, I'm not listening to the Archers until they tell me that they're going to end the show in 2015. Unless I know that there's an ending, I can't make sense of it. We don't think that way. We just keep listening and the stories keep going on. And I think the same could be true of this formless suggestion, that it doesn't just because it goes on infinitely in at least one direction doesn't mean that we can't make sense of it at each moment as it continues. The other criticism is human lives are fraught. That is, human lives only make sense insofar as death sort of looms over them. There's a poet called Wallace Stevens, and there's a line of his that says, "Death is the mother of beauty." And I think what he's getting at there is, without death, nothing has consequence. Nothing is important, really, unless you can die. Because if you don't die, hey, you just screw up and you can do it again. Like having kids or getting married or all of the important decisions, or what you major in college, philosophy. You have to, if you do die, you've only got a limited amount of time. It's important, it matters. Whereas if you don't die, put it off, who cares? And I'm a procrastinator, I have to have something serious hanging over my head to get things done, for things to matter. I mean, I think that's why on modern TV shows, starting with like The Sopranos and going on through Deadwood and The Wire and Game of Thrones most notably, they kill off characters. They didn't used to kill off characters. If you watch old shows, old TV shows, there would be like tension, like on 70s shows like Starsky and Hutch. But Starsky and Hutch weren't going to die. Whereas now, they kill off your favorite characters in the middle of the season. And it somehow makes the shows more meaningful. It really brings people in. They don't just say, oh, screw this, they killed off my favorite characters, I hate this show. It's like they become even more hooked on the show because things matter. And I think that's probably the strongest criticism that the what does he call them? The Immortality curmudgeons have, and that's, I think, that's one of the three. I think depth. Belshaw talks about boredom, depth, and character. Depth is, I think, what we're getting at here. Okay, let's see. So we talked about narratives. Infinity is fundamentally different. I think this is an important point too. I think people don't really take seriously the idea that immortality is forever. I think we just think of not dying and phew, I've got another day. But we don't think I've got for all eternity. Because we can't imagine all eternity. That's a long time. You could travel to every part of the universe, or every part of the known universe, an infinite number of times. So you can't say there'll always be something new to do, well, unless the universe is infinite, I guess, but because you'll do it all a million times. Climb Mount Everest a billion times. Throw yourself into a volcano if you're indestructible a billion times. So that kind of, once you consider that kind of gives weight to the getting bored thing. Now, Fisher says, I don't think you'll get bored. He makes a distinction between different kinds of pleasures, and he says there are some pleasures that are non-repeatable. And he says, yes, those are the ones that you could get bored of. These are self-exhausting pleasures. But he says there are repeatable pleasures. amongst the repeatable pleasures are sex, eating fine meals, listening to music, experiencing beautiful works of art or nature, meditation, and prayer. Prayer, for example, is like the shouting hallelujah for all eternity. And he, in support of his view, he quotes Corliss Lamont, who says, you know, if it were true that I was going to get bored of everything, I'd be bored of drinking cool, clear water. But here, I'm 62 years old, cool, clear water tastes as good as ever. Suggesting, now, does that suggest that that proves that it will be equally as good an infinite number of years from now? I don't know. I don't know if that really proves it, because infinity is too long. And besides, I think some people would question Fisher's list of repeatable pleasures. Certainly, the novelist Julian Barnes criticizes exactly that. Listen to the pleasures that he lists that you'll get bored of. An eternity of sex, beer, drugs, fast cars. Exactly the kind of animal activities that that Fisher says are repeatable. So you have to decide. I think that about covers it. So what's interesting about this, it's kind of a small topic, but it asks a question that people don't normally ask. They sort of assume that immortality, good thing. Although, as I said, there's a history in literature of questioning this. I recommend Tuck Everlasting. I don't remember the details, but I do remember it being a good book. And I mean, I read it as an adult because a colleague of mine was teaching a philosophy in children's literature class, and he had copies of it lying around, and I read it, and it's well written. It's one of those kids' books that you can read at any age. There's that episode of Star Trek, which I am getting processed as we speak, and I will get posted to Blackboard. The idea being, there's a character in it who there's a class of beings called the Q, who are like gods, only there's several of them, and in that they're supposed to be omnipotent, and they're immortal. And the plot of the episode is that one of them is bored and wants to commit suicide, and this is very much against the code of the Q, and he's a renegade, and he's on the run from the rest of them because they say, no, you can't do that, you're not allowed to commit suicide, that's not what we do. And that's sort of the plot, and part of the episode is him trying to convey how his life has become so boring, how he's become bored of immortality. So it's relevant to this topic. Alright, I'll talk to you next time.